to episode 3 of the All Immigrant podcast. I am your host, Abin. I am once again joined by my co host, Vivek. And today we will be having a talk with Hussein Popat, who is the co founder of Stratus Technologies, a cloud based company based out of Kenya. Vivek, would you like to introduce our guest for today?
Yeah, absolutely. So, great to be back again. I'm loving the momentum we're building up in. So it's awesome. So Hussein and I go back, I think I want to say a little over 3 years. Uh, Hussein is actually one of the most interesting people I know. Is a really awesome, awesome professional as well as an awesome person in general. He's a fourth generation Kenyan Indian. He was born and brought up in Kenya, Nairobi. He spent most of his earlier life there. He moved to the US. He did his college in the US at USC, and then he's had great stints. He's worked with amazing companies, Northwestern Mutual. He's worked with Slack, and then he worked with Microsoft, all in the US. He also then moved to Canada, and he continued working with Microsoft and did that for a bit. And now he's come back. He's gone back to Kenya to manage a business vertical in his family business. So, and I think Hussein is under 30 years old. So he's basically done all this stuff, and he's really young. So I think it's a phenomenal journey, Hussein. So we really welcome you to the podcast. We're extremely excited to have you on here.
Thank you both. It's an honor to be here, and really looking forward to it.
Okay, so to kickstart things, Vivek did mention that you've lived in and from your the little intro as well, that you've lived across several countries over the last 20 odd years. How much has that influenced you as a person growing up?
I think it's I've been very lucky to come from a family that's blended, I would say. So my dad, his family is Kenyan Indian, as Vivek pointed out. We're fourth generation, but my mom is half German, half Pakistani, and she grew up in Karachi. But from all the way going back to my grandfather's generation, the emphasis has really been put on our family to really explore the world as much as possible. And so I've had that, in the back of my mind since I was a little kid, and I've been really lucky to be part of a family that has enabled me to do so. But I just feel like the biggest thing it's allowed me to do is have a lot of experiences that not many other people have had the privilege to. And it's given me a worldview that I think shapes everything that I do in my day-to-day a little bit differently compared to some of my peers.
Awesome. So I'm guessing that's the curiosity you spoke about, the openness in your family. That's what got you to North America to study and then work. So I guess the question was, how did you enjoy that whole experience of coming over to North America? What was your experience like as a student and a professional, and overall as an immigrant?
Yeah. So I think, a couple of things to touch on there. Being part of the immigrant experience already as part of my background growing up in Kenya, there's a lot of things that I think are quite common across many immigrant families. And for us, it was always a really big emphasis on education. And so my parents worked really hard and were able to put me through school in the UK first, actually, for my last 2 years, and then to the US. And it's definitely not an easy adjustment going thousands of miles away from your family. But I was very fortunate to have good role models. I'm the youngest of 3 siblings, and both of my siblings, my brother and my sister, had followed similar paths. And so for me, it was kind of the natural next step to kind of continue that. And I was able to build on a lot of that learning, all of the kind of learnings that they took from their experience, and try and make the most out of mine. And so for me, especially getting towards university, for us, America was kind of the gold standard for university and getting a job after university and all of that. And personally, being interested in tech, I really wanted to be closer to California and the tech scene over there. And it just happened to work out nicely that way. And for me, the experience was, it's hard to put into a couple words, but I think I was lucky enough that I was able to be diligent in my studies, but also spend a lot of time doing what I'll call extracurricular activities. And so that was a big part of what I was looking forward to. And I think that it helped me be a little bit more well-rounded and set myself up for what life was like after university.
Great. And when you did move, did you face any sort of adversity? Well, wouldn't even go so far as to call it adversity. I'd say some of the challenges that Vivek and I have faced, and we both have our unique challenges. I don't think you'd ever have a set of challenges that are generalized for a whole bunch of people. So, what were some of the issues you had when you left home, probably for the first time, just generally like that you faced in the workplace, something along those lines?
Yeah, great question. I think when I left home, I was 16, and kind of the first thing to hit you is you don't have home cooked food, or you don't get kind of the same stuff in the grocery stores, and you just feel really far away, from home, and a little bit isolated. So that's definitely a journey, um, character building, I'll call it, just
Hmm.
being in a completely new scenario. And then I think in the US, I found it a lot tougher to assimilate. It was just a completely different way of, I guess, thinking and viewing the world. When I first came, I found the U.S. quite insulated. Not many people knew where Kenya was, or even what Kenya was. The amount of people that came up to me every day and were shocked that I was from Africa, or that Africa is not a country, it's a continent. There was a lot of
Ah,
that kind of comments to deal with, and I think that just emphasized, or put it made me realize how far away I was from home. And I think it taught me really quickly the value of community, what I missed back home, and how I grew up, pretty pluralistic, multicultural, lots of friends from different backgrounds. I noticed that I craved that more being away from it. And there were other things in the US that people couldn't understand my accent. I'd ask for water, and people would have me repeat things 5 or 6 times, just like very small things in my experience that were frustrating. They grated at me a lot, and it was a good exercise, I think, in like how to exhibit patience. Something that it's not my biggest strength, but I really think that the first year, especially, I struggled. Honestly, I thought that I was kind of the odd man out, especially amongst my American friends, trying to settle into American life, and all of that, and it just felt like I was in a different world completely. And then entering the workforce, that was a different kind of challenge. I think, I was lucky enough, especially at Microsoft, there are a lot of people who have this kind of broad exposure to the world. And so there were less of those, oh, Kenya's in Africa, Africa is not a country kind of thing, which is great. But there are a lot of ways that, perhaps, especially growing up from like an Indian immigrant background, where um, things that I would consider to be important to professionalism and stuff like that, the American way was slightly different. And so especially being in sales, how you build trust and interact with clients was a lot more, maybe less formal than I guess I was perhaps used to coming back, from back home. But it just taught me a different way of doing things. And I think, again, it took me about 6 or 10 months to get really into the swing of things, especially from the professional side of things.
mhm.
But it's all of these, challenges, I think, have been more of a learning experience than anything truly, what I would consider a great adversity. But it's been a huge exercise for me to kind of build that patience. And I think it's been good for me as well, because the friendships and community that I built abroad reflected really what I wanted to get out of my experience, rather than kind of like a homogenous experience in the States. So I was lucky to find many kindred spirits that felt the same way.
Well, I mean, I think the thing that stood out to me the most was when you said that you were in sales at Microsoft, because sales is something, you wouldn't expect an immigrant to take on a sales job typically. That is that you're breaking more than one barrier on that one. So that's, I would love to double click on that, but in a second. But I want to just spend a few more moments on your college experience first. So you mentioned, the lack. You said you didn't find the community that you were used to, and there were some differences. And we spoke about some of the negatives. But what were some of the positive changes that you found when you moved to the US? How did you? What were the good things that you found, which was according to you lacking in Africa? And also, how did you build some of the things that you felt were lacking? How did you build upon those things in the US?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think in general, from your everyday experience, it's apples to oranges, to be honest. But I think the shift from a kind of more communal based society growing up in Kenya to kind of the more individualistic one in the US, not to say it's not to generalize, but it really identified gaps in myself. And it was uncomfortable to kind of confront that, people are going to think that I'm like not necessarily the weird foreign kid, but they're not going to understand my experience, and I have to do an even better job of communicating and not letting the small stuff get to me as much. And so it taught me a lot on how I can just improve on things myself. But I think the biggest thing that was great in the US was that there was people from everywhere. I think there were so many people that had a multitude of experiences that I could relate to or that could relate to me. And we were all kind of lost together, I guess, in this new world. And for us, especially in a place like university, through your dorm or class or everything like that, I was able to meet people that I never thought I'd have friends from Malaysia or from Colombia or Panama or places like this. And that's something that I'm not sure other places in the world really have that kind of melting pot like culture like the US does. And so it opened my eyes to a lot of things. And it's hard to say that the life in the US is bad. I mean, I was able to get like food delivery and stuff like that, and could live, basically just off my phone. I wouldn't have to say hi to anyone. I could get stuff delivered to my door. I had all this new technology and innovation that I could experience firsthand. And something as simple as like depositing a check, through your mobile app, that was something that I never thought was possible growing up in Kenya. And so that kind of exposure was really invaluable.
So Hussein, you got into Microsoft, obviously, and you work for big companies, Slack, which is a Salesforce company, now Western Mutual, which is like a huge wealth management company. So I mean, you work for big companies, big brands, big names. And you've done roles which are let's just say non-conventional roles for what an immigrant would do, right? So how did you what was your experience like? What kind of obstructions or obstacles did you face, and how did you actually go about overcoming them? Because I'm sure you had very unique obstructions and challenges to compared to what many of us immigrants probably have or had.
Yeah, I think typically for me, what I would consider the kind of practical immigrant route is like develop a skill. My dad, he really pushed me to become an accountant. For many, it's engineering or having a very tangible skill. And that was just not really where my passion or what I wanted to do was. And so naturally, the way the US system is set up to get that, that STEM OPT and get the visa sponsorship to stay long term is more challenging. And I was okay with that. I think I accepted that. If things were maybe different, would I have told a younger me to be a little less stubborn, perhaps? But the thing for me was always work hard. I didn't really think that I was going to get 4.0 in everything, and I didn't. But I wanted to maximize what I was good at, and that was being social and building relationships and building a network. And that's kind of what led me to the internships at first, and then onto Microsoft as well. But it was not easy. I think for every first round interview that I got, there were probably 10 or 20 rejections, primarily because of my visa status. And so it was always an uphill battle compared to a lot of my friends who were very similar in terms of profile, especially from like a recruiting standpoint. But they were getting, interviews left, right, and center and offers, and that really wasn't the case. And so there were many stressful nights and calls to siblings and families and everyone trying to see, is there someone I can talk to at this company, get an informational interview there. And that was, there were times where it was really frustrating. Generally, I remember trying to go for Slack. I was studying abroad in Hong Kong at the time, and I'd maybe gone through like 50 or 60 applications for a summer internship, and it was getting close to March, and by that time, most people have already hired for internships, and kind of through a lot of luck and just diligence, managed to make it through, and Slack gave me the offer. But at every step of the way, there've been setbacks, and I think it's just about how you rebound, basically, how you pick yourself up from that. Even with Slack itself, after interning there for the summer offer and for the summer, they had expressed that they might bring me back, but again, visa stuff kind of got in the way, and I found out quite late that they would not bring me back after all, because of visa stuff, and so it left me in a scramble to find a full-time job and stay in the US, right? And so I think I was very much helped by huge strokes of luck. Microsoft reached out to me; they liked my profile, and then just not being shaken by that adversity or thinking that the deck was stacked against me helped. I think it made it easier to be hopeful than to kind of focus on a lot of the obstacles that a lot of international students especially face. And so it was a grind, but I think it made me a little more resilient for it.
That's I mean, we all know what their challenge is like. I come from a marketing background myself, so I fully understand the amount of effort it takes to convince certain companies that you're worth the pain that they might have to go through to a certain degree, just to get you hired, right? And the funny thing is, like, this leads to my next question, is that once you get your foot through the door, which itself is a Herculean task, then you need to convince yourself, your company, and your clients that you're good enough to be there. So was that a little daunting when you got in first? Because you're like, okay, I need to prove myself once again. I especially because more often not, we grow up. The US is primarily a nation where the sales jobs have primarily been white jobs, or people who've idly grown up in the country. So you, as an immigrant coming into the scene as a newbie, was there any sort of, like, how do I put this? Any sort of fear or just like caution when you first started working with Microsoft?
Yeah, definitely. Especially at a company like Microsoft, they're very straightforward about what they expect from you in a sales role. They expect you to hit the numbers, and if you don't, it's not really a long leash that's given to a lot of people. And so there was a lot of trepidation from my side. A couple of things I think helped from me in that English is my first language, and so for whatever reason, my parents decided that would be the best case. From my side now, as an adult, I can see it kind of came at the expense of perhaps knowing a little bit more about my culture and my heritage, but it did set me up very well to kind of mingle with clients, and so that helped a lot. I had other colleagues in sales. Indian, Chinese American, or even European colleagues who their accents on the client side, there was a lot of what I would say, maybe not miscommunication, but misalignment. It was hard for them to find common ground, and so I was lucky that it was relatively more straightforward for me. What I will say is that there were plenty of times where just finding that connection with clients was a bit of a challenge. These were customers that had been born and raised in the Midwest and maybe traveled out the country once or twice, so worlds away from where I grew up and what I was used to. And so finding commonality there was really tough. And I think it was, again, a combination of like luck and just persevering, just pushing through and trying to play the numbers games that is sales, making sure that I had enough touch points with my customers and was keeping their best interests in hearts. And eventually that won over some of them, and others that I didn't win over, there was enough churn in the Microsoft system that they went to another sales rep eventually. But definitely in my team, I think there was 3 of us in our organization of about, I think, like 80 sellers. 3 of us were non-American. And so
Wow.
That's
it was challenging for us, and I think for them as well, we were all kind of in the same boat of, we're here on OPT, we're trying to get this H1B, we're trying not to get fired, we're trying to get our customers to like us. It was kind of a lot to navigate at once, and so it helped that the three of us had that kind of commonality of stress. I don't know what else to call it, but it wasn't easy, and I think there was a lot of shock value, especially once you get to know customers a little bit later, and they're like, "Oh, you're from Africa," and it's the same kind of questions that I would get in my first week of school. But it did take some time to kind of win people over a little bit.
Oh man, I can imagine that would be really something. So I guess if you were to give an immigrant advice today on how to break into Microsoft sales and how to crush it in Microsoft sales, what would be the three things you would give them or tell them?
Yeah, I think if I look back at myself at 2021, second, third year of university, I'm gearing up for that last year and trying to get a place. I think your network is really crucial. As much as it's something that's repeated by a number of people, it's kind of hard to overestimate the impact that it has. And so put yourself out there, talk to as many people as you can. Generally, people are quite open to helping and giving advice. And so take advantage of that. And I think whenever there are going to be breaks that roll your way, opportunities that knock on your door, take as many of those as you can. Even if it may not feel like it's the best fit right now. It's for us as immigrants trying to stay in the US, if you're not in STEM, just getting to that first day at a company that's willing to sponsor you, that's kind of the goal really at that point. And so knock on as many doors as you can in your network. Hopefully one will open, and make sure you don't lose that opportunity. And then once you get in, I think it's more or less the same. Make yourself available, talk to as many people as possible. Pray that you get a little bit of luck in the lottery, more lucky than I did. And I don't think it hurts to have things maybe in the background, that to kind of hedge your bets. But I think for anyone looking to crush it as an immigrant, I don't subscribe to this theory that you have to change your entire personality or anything like that. I believe that you can be authentic in yourself. Obviously, there are things that help. A lot of customers don't always understand our accents, but that's not the end of the world. Keep persevering. Really, make sure that you are communicating your value in other ways. If you're in sales, keeping your customers' best interests in heart, showing them that you can ultimately build trust with them, right? By getting them what they need. That's what most customers care about. It doesn't matter where you're from, but finding a way. And I think the biggest thing for me is that really communicating your value. That's something that in my first years I didn't fully understand, but that's something that I feel like a lot of Americans are taught at a young age. Going back to that kind of individualistic nature of society there, you have to constantly communicate your value, make a note of all of your accomplishments, and don't be afraid to kind of communicate that to anyone that you meet, really, internal, external. We're always going to have to prove ourselves. And so it's one of those things that the sooner you can start, and there's ways you can do it being humble as well, but finding a way to really communicate your value will just help keep you in the right, thoughts of decision makers, and hopefully, like I said, with the luck of the lottery, you'll be able to build a very long career.
So just staying on Microsoft for a second longer. So you were with them in the US, and then you moved to Canada. So what were the circumstances that led to that move?
Yeah, that one was a bit of a blow to, I guess, my self-confidence, but it was a lot of hard work. And then at the end of 1 year at Microsoft, my OPT was running out, and I hadn't got into the lottery for the H1B. And so it was very easy to be frustrated at the system and all of that. But really, Microsoft had tried all they could. They'd hired very expensive lawyers and invested a lot to try to keep me in the US, and ultimately it just wasn't to be. But fortunately, my manager at the time, he had kind of, I guess, negotiated or done some back channeling to allow me to go to Canada, but still work on an American team. And so, even though geographically things are going to be very different, from the work perspective, it was still working with American clients, working with my American colleagues, um, doing pretty much what I'd done for the past year, just 500 miles north in Toronto instead of in New York. And so it was again another move after 1 year, which I think was tough to handle, especially kind of coming out of COVID. New York was just opening up. I was looking forward to exploring the city, getting to know it as a fully functioning and thriving city, and then life has a way of sometimes kicking you in the teeth with that.
How was your pandemic experience in New York? Were you in the pandemic? Were you in New York for the pandemic when things kicked off?
I was, well, not when it kicked off. I was finishing my last semester at uni in LA. It was, I'm sure everyone would describe it as maybe a weird time. We weren't really sure what was happening. A lot of my international friends went home. Never really got to say goodbye to many of them. A lot of my American friends went back to their respective homes. And so I was holed up with two of my best friends, all three of us internationals, kind of living out our last half semester of class and then the summer before we all started working. And it was, in a way, it was fun. We were all kind of navigating this very big period of uncertainty, but we were all together. We had the very unique experience of like, if I travel out the country, will I be let back in? What does that kind of look like? If I don't get let back in, does that mean I lose my job? All of those kind of anxieties about not having a stable immigration status. Again, we kind of navigated that together. And so I ended up moving to New York actually with one of those guys. And it was peak pandemic. I think New York was the epicenter of the world at that time. And so we would wake up, work, cook dinner together sometimes, and watch. I think we watched The Bachelor, The Bachelorette, and other TV shows just to kind of pass the time. And that was kind of it. You know, New York at that point, the parks and stuff were open, and a handful of museums and stuff were open, but you couldn't really go sit in restaurants. And when you could, you had to sit outside in the freezing cold. And so it was definitely not the New York that I was expecting. And so it was, again, another period of adjustment. And I think everyone was kind of going through it at that time. And so we were lucky that we kind of navigated it together. But it was definitely something that I wish I could get another crack at New York and live, a proper New Yorker life, maybe not shut down by COVID.
I think it helps because I went to uni in New York, and I was in New York at the time when things went haywire. I was like you, I was in my last semester as well. And Vivek had just moved. I think the two of us, he just moved in the summer of 20, I'd say the spring of 2020.
No, I moved in early 2019, but
Sorry, you moved 2019. Yeah, confused my.
Within a year of me getting in, I was
yeah. So, and at the time I was interning up in Westchester County for the Zeiss Group, and that was where the first case of COVID was ever reported. I to this day have no idea, and it was hilarious, right? Because companies had no idea what to do, and
Right.
I was obviously concerned after a point where I'd asked them if, guys, should I work from home? And they're like, no, come into the office, but it's fine. We've got a handle on things. And the day I got into the office, they decided to shut things down, and I never went back in. But like you said, it was the experience with your friends that really made that whole situation really bearable, because me and my roommates, we learned to cook, we learned to bake. I grew up in an Indian household, and I so much I didn't know how to like stir boiling water up to a certain point. So it was like for me to have gone from zero skills to about, let's say, 5 skills that would keep me alive if I were to like continue living the rest of my life, was great. And I get it. I get that. I don't think New York will ever go back to being the same, because there's always that fear of of this life-threatening disease just absolutely ravaging through the city. But having seen it empty out the way it did was a very jarring experience. Like you mentioned, a lot of your friends went back home. Similarly, a lot of my friends like went back to India. A lot of some of them, the locals just ended up going back to their parents' place, and it was a very strange time. It was walking through Times Square. A deserted Times Square was extremely strange, but it's an experience I'll never forget.
Absolutely, yeah. I think I'd been to visit New York before, and my brother, he still lives there, but it was almost like I was in the scene of a zombie movie or something like that. And my
Yeah.
office is in Times Square, and I couldn't even go in. But I'd walk around there, and you're right, it was just a ghost town. And so it was definitely tricky. I think a lot of Catan and Harry
Yeah,
Potter marathons got us through that time. So
a lot of Catan. Like it was a game I just didn't get, but in the pandemic, oh my god, I think we risked breaking friendships at one point. It got so competitive.
My wife and I got the extension version, and now we play with like 6 or 8 people. Yeah, long games,
Yeah.
but anyway, so I want to ask another question, Hussein. So you work with all of these. You're working with this big company in Canada at the time. You're doing pretty well in your life, in your career. So what were the circumstances that led you to decide to move back to Kenya?
yeah, great question. I think towards the end of my second year, I felt that I was stagnating a little bit in my development. There were things at Microsoft that I appreciated a lot and I learned a lot from, but I felt that going into my third year, there wasn't a ton of, I guess, like new experiences for me, especially in that role, for me to kind of continue my personal and career development. And unfortunately, at the time was kind of when a lot of the layoffs started, and pre-layoffs was a lot of the hiring freezes. And so my uh, lateral movement within Microsoft was kind of limited. And so I had begun really about July of last year, kind of figuring out what my next steps would be, and ran into a very familiar problem of when applying to jobs in Canada and the US, no one would hire me because I didn't have visa status. And so it was kind of a sick deja vu all over again. And it was a good lesson for me that, no matter what kind of company you work for, the visa status is kind of more important than the name on your resume. And so
Yeah.
at that point in time, I'm very lucky to have a European passport. So I was contemplating, is Europe maybe the right next step for me? But I was becoming a lot more interested with what was happening in Kenya. I think at that point, despite the pandemic, they had raised, I think, record numbers of VC funding, and it seemed that there were a number of particularly tech companies here that were really poised to kind of explode and grow very quickly. And so it seemed like quite an exciting time to be back on the ground. And it happened to be that my dad had asked me if I'd be interested in coming back and helping him out for a while. And after many months of, should I not, going back at it, making pros and cons lists, for the end of time, it just happened to get to a point where I said, maybe this is the right time while I'm still young. I can always use the experience, learn from it, and if it doesn't work out after 2-3 years, I can pivot and go somewhere else, or maybe apply for a master's degree or something like that. And the cons at the time seemed very low, and so it was, to me, not as risky as a move as I think my friends thought it would be. And it was a chance to be a part of my family business and help that grow, which I think was also very attractive for me, growing up kind of in the business and seeing how it worked. And so it made sense, but it was not an easy decision. And leaving Canada, I felt like Canada had become kind of a second home, despite only being there for just under 2 years. I had a great time there, and it was a culture that I connected with a lot more than in America, to be honest.
Oh. Abhin, you want to go one more question and I go one after that?
Sure, I can do that. So, I mean, given the last decade or so at this point, you'd consider yourself to be some form of a global citizen, given the the amount of places you've had to live in. What's next for you?
You know what? I'm still trying to figure that out myself, but I think being on the ground here in Kenya and seeing, despite the macroeconomic outlook right now for not just Kenya, but for most of the African continent, despite a lot of those macro challenges, there are many challenges here that need people like me to kind of come back and see how we can tap into the broader community and kind of take what we've learned being abroad and see how we can build a solution that is more fit for what this country needs and what many of the industries in not just this country but this continent need. And so I think for the time being, I'm going to be around in Kenya for a while. We'll see, though. I think one of the things that I've practiced throughout my life, and I think it's the nature of maybe not knowing if today or tomorrow I might have to leave the country, is keeping my options open. So there's maybe potential to return to Canada or go to Europe or the Middle East. But I do know that the one thing I want to keep doing is exploring, and so it's hard for me to stay still in one place. But there are some amazing people here doing fantastic things, and it seems like the right time to kind of stick around and see how those pan out.
Awesome.
Great.
So one final question. So I mean, you were working for big companies in North America, organized companies where you were in the middle management. And now you moved to Kenya, where you're working for a mid-sized, fast-growing company, which is your family business, where you're in the upper management and you're trying to start a new sub venture or a sub brand within that business. So it's a two-part question. The first part is how is that? There's so much of change in your life, right? It's from every aspect. So how are you dealing with that change? And two is if you like and you're willing, maybe you can share a little bit about what your company is trying to do and what you're looking to do in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think especially being in our family business is a company by the name of Computech, and we're a systems integration company based in 5 countries in the region. And so very much in line with what I was doing at Microsoft and in some cases selling the same products actually. But I worked with a lot of companies like my family business out in America and in Canada. And the landscape of IT in what I would call, the global north is probably about 5 or so years ahead of where we are in Kenya and the rest of the global south. And so there are a lot of trends that I had kind of seen come to fruition in the US, one of them being cloud computing and how it grew very rapidly and has kind of become the go-to IT model for a lot of especially younger companies. But there were a lot of trends like that I noticed and I thought I could apply coming back here as well. And so being 3 years at Microsoft selling really gave me exposure to what a lot of customer pain points were and how these solutions were helping. But it also showed me, coming back here where the gap is between Kenya and the US from an IT point of view. And so my goal really is to come back and see how we can take the family business to the next level. How can we become a larger player in not just in the East Africa region, but maybe perhaps continent-wide? How can we be fully entrenched in our customers so that we are guiding them through their digital transformation and helping them make sense of all of this change and innovation that's coming out of places like the US and Europe and places like that. And so my goal is really here to scale and build on the platform that my dad and his brothers have built for the last 40 years and pay respect to that, but also, make sure that the company is ready for what's coming next. I think everyone loves to talk about AI and all of that, but it's not. There are many technologies that Africa is not just yet ready to embrace because of a lot of the infrastructure gaps. So how can we not just prepare ourselves as a company, but all of our customers to kind of expand their business and have IT at the heart of that? So that's what we're really looking to do. But it's a very different feeling going from a big organization where you can feel like one person in a huge machine to a smaller operation, and you have a much greater emotional investment, I would say. And so it's the workload has gone up and the stress has gone up, but the satisfaction has also gone up when things kind of pan out. So it's a journey I'm still kind of trying to take one day at a time and learn as I go. But it's a different beast entirely, and it's a challenge I'm enjoying so far.
Wow, it's amazing. This is amazing. Thank you so much, Hussein, for being with us on this podcast and sharing your journey. I think it was amazing. The amount of learning I personally took from it was phenomenal. A lot of reinforcement for me. You touched upon some of the things that I truly believe in. The importance of perseverance, hard work, luck and timing. Making the right decisions at the right time that works for you. It was truly amazing. It was. Thank you for your time.
Thank you both for having me. I really appreciate it, and I love what the ethos behind this podcast is, and looking forward to listening to all the future episodes.
Okay, that's great to hear, man. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.